Hi. So we are now finally investigating Najdorf variation. Uh, well, very well known, maybe the most popular in all Sicilians, probably the most reliable, even though white, of course, has a lot of tries and quite dangerous tries, but for many, many years it's holding well, and also in the current state of the theory Black is actually doing fine, but there are a couple of lines which are where Black's path is quite narrow to a decent position, and it's maybe the most interesting, the richest Sicilian in the whole spectrum of this opening because positions are very complicated. Actually, it's a very strategical opening, Najdorf. It's not that tactical. Okay, of course, there are a couple of variations where the play is pretty direct and forced, but most of the time it's very positional, I would say. And Garry Kasparov was extremely successful with this opening because I always considered Kasparov not really as a tactician. Of course, he had incredible sense of initiative and his attacks were incredibly resourceful. But I believe there is one very important point which many commentators, chess enthusiasts are missing, that Kasparov was incredibly deep strategical player. And that's why Najdorf was fitting him so well, because it's sharp, it's double-edged, but also it's extremely conceptual and strategical. And he was always very strong in understanding the position in whole, understanding the the patterns, how the game can develop, and certain strategical pawn structures. He was always very good at this. And so this is a combination of dynamic, it's very complicated dynamic play, and a lot of strategical content in Najdorf, which was really his strongest point. That's why he won so many games in Najdorf. But it doesn't mean that Black is better, of course. Only if you are Kasparov in Najdorf. Otherwise, you still have to fight for equality there. But again, it's also very sharp. So most of the lines, Black has his chances also, his winning chances. I mean, actually, it's not so easy for White to sterilize the game in Najdorf, which is also quite nice because sometimes we play with weaker opponents. So in Najdorf, it's at least you need to know a lot of theory, a lot of concrete lines for White in order to make a forced draw. But normally it's not really why people play chess and study openings, to try to make a forced draw with White. So then you always get some winning chances, complicated positions. So very, very good opening. So now let's start. I want to start Najdorf with the sidelines for White. I mean, not very popular lines, not extremely dangerous, but still maybe if you want to pick up one of those lines with White, why not? Because in any case, Najdorf is a permanent guest in the tournament practice and in general in chess. And if you are playing e4 with White, you're playing main Sicilians, better to have more than one system against Najdorf, because it's very serious opening and it's difficult to find to get a real advantage here. So that's why it can be useful, maybe some of one or two moves which which I'm going to show you during this lesson, you can play from time to time, at least with White, even though I'm sure White has nothing in sidelines of Najdorf. And in any case, obviously, if you want to play Black, you need to know, better to know everything, yeah. That's one of the reasons of this course, that you, instead of spending a lot of time and getting into all those thousands of games, you already know the directions, and not only the directions, but also the precise concrete moves that you can actually, I think with Black, you can simply play already after listening to 1 hour, of this lesson, you can play all those sidelines with black. So let's go again. The worst moves for white. I believe Queen F3 is one of the worst moves. It looks kind of active and interesting, but actually G6 is very unpleasant because really Queen on F3 is very bad in Dragon, because you need also to play H3 in order to make long castle. Of course, white can try to play bishop E2 and then short castle, but absolutely not clear what is queen doing on F3. And in case of bishop E3, let's say bishop G7, you cannot castle long because of bishop G4. So you need to play another unnecessary move, or let's say you start with H3, bishop G7, bishop E3, short castle, long castle. At least it's a principal way of playing. But in fact, after knight c6, white is already fighting for equality. I'm not completely sure he can equalize, because taking on c6 and e5, knight d5 here already, black is just better. So logical is to play g4, at least once you played h3. And after bishop d7, well, again, pawn on e4 is a bit weak. Queen on f3 is strange, not clear what it's doing. At least on d2 it was protecting the king side, the knight on c3, because black sometimes can get rook c8, rook takes c3. So here even engine's already given a small plus for black in this position. So queen f3, g6 is simply good for black. So queen f3 I don't recommend you to play. Then another, well, dubious move is queen e2. Sometimes in Sicilians it works, but here, well, you can of course play g6. At least white can go bishop g5, bishop g7, long castle, and it's unclear, but at least playable for white. But e5 is, well, some sort of a refutation, because here queen on e2 is just doing nothing. It's not a good place for the queen. Now if knight f5, d5, again, black is already better. Bishop g5, d4, long castle, even if it's seemingly, well, quite active. But after knight c6, well, queen a5 is a serious threat, and let's say f4, queen a5, black is better simply. So, but then at least knight b3 should be played. But after bishop e6, well, the point is, after f4, black has b5, and now very typical also idea to secure the c4 square for the bishop. And after f5, bishop c4, on top of everything comes with a tempi. So black is at least equal here. And if white is playing in this classical way, bishop e3, knight bd7, long castle, rook c8, now already rook takes c3 is a serious issue. For instance, after f3, black doesn't have to take on c3, but it's good take on d5, and probably black is better already. So probably white's best is to play queen d2 now, and it makes no sense. White simply lost a tempi in this, well, very well-known theoretical line, let's say b5. Well, basically white is just tempi down, and actually even with a tempi, it's quite difficult to get an advantage here with white. So I think queen e2, e5 is kind of refuting, yeah, simply the white's idea. So then other strange moves, rook g1. Not so bad. Strangely enough, white is not worse after rook g1. I mean, it looks really funny as a move, but white wants to play g4. And black has, of course, many different ways of playing, but I give you two, I believe, a matter of taste. What you like more depends on the pawn structure, which you enjoy more. For instance, g6, I think it's perfectly fine for black. Of course, now white has to play g4, otherwise he just lost the tempi. And he cannot anymore castle short also. So g4 is logical, and now I checked this variation, knight c6. Now in case of bishop e3 is actually h5 is very unpleasant. Already probably slightly better for black. So white has to play g5, knight d7, bishop e3. And now, yeah, bishop g7, queen d2 is at least playable for white. Not sure it's any better, but playable. I think h6 is a good move. Because here black already not planning to castle short, so h4, otherwise, well, the h2 pawn will be weak. Hg, hg, bishop g7. And this position is just very complicated and unclear. I looked, analyzed it just before recording this lesson, and I believe black is perfectly fine, and it's quite double-edged. So if you want to play for a win, g6, I believe it's perfectly fine, because e5, okay, is good enough. It's a very clear-cut equalizer, but not too many winning chances for black. So knight b3, bishop e6, g4, and now you have to play d5, otherwise white will go g5, but d5 is perfectly fine. E d5, knight d5, takes, queen takes, and there were quite many games here. White still tried little something here, but of course the position is just equal. Let's say bishop b6, rook d7, or g5, king c7, just against bishop b6, and then black develops, just an equal position. So I would say rook g1 is harmless, because e5 is a straightforward equalizer, and you can also play a more complicated position with some winning chances. So rook g1, that's all about rook g1. Basically, there are other moves, but that is good enough. I don't like it with white, and with black you are ready to face it already. So what else? There is also h4 move, which even became quite popular for a certain period of time, a few years ago. Again, of course, it looks strange. I don't believe white can really fight for advantage with such a move, but still quite decent players have played this h4 move. I believe, again, e5 is the most logical. In general, in Najdorf, I want to mention that before, because Kasparov was, basically the main person who was developing the theory of this opening, and he liked very much to play with the pawn on e6 in the 80s, 90s, Moskvin-Ingen type of systems. But lately, with years, somehow people moved more and more, including himself, Kasparov, to these pawn structures with e5, because in pre-computer era, somehow it was considered to be weakening the d5 square. Of course, the positions were not so clear, but still, good old school liked not to have weaknesses like this d5, like the square on d5. Now, after so much practice and engines analyzing Najdorf, actually everybody understands that this weakness on d5 is not so dramatic, especially since the second knight is not getting there. The knight on f6 is controlling d5 square. So now in many systems, black is actually playing a6 followed by e5, as you will see later. So here e5 is also good, very logical, especially after h4. Knight b3, and now again black has a choice of playing bishop e7. White has to somehow justify this move h4. It's not easy to manage it. So after bishop e7, the only way to justify it, I guess, is to play bishop g5. At least the most logical way to justify it. Bishop e6, and also very typical. I want immediately to start explaining certain typical strategical ideas of Najdorf. So when white is playing bishop g5, black plays bishop e6. Now, usually white is immediately taken on f6 here, because otherwise if he waits, then knight bd7 comes, and anyway bishop on g5 in this structure, makes only sense, with the idea to take on f6. But in this position, black will take back with a knight, having full control on the d5 square, and then bishop g5 doesn't make slightest sense simply. So the whole idea of bishop g5 is usually if knight bd7, then at least bishop on c8 is not so well placed. So white has more control on the d5 square because the bishop is not on e6, and there are some ideas at least for white. And if bishop e6, white immediately takes on f6, takes, playing g3 here in this particular position. Also, you will see later very typical play. Bishop e7, black wants to develop his knight to d7, and since the pawn on d6 was hanging, so he's playing first, protecting this pawn. And let's say knight d5, knight d7. Very typical position. Or let's say you can start with bishop h3, castle, Again, if knight d5, knight d7, and then, well, again, it's not this position. Not the knight is not on this. The knight on b3 is very far from supporting the second knight, so fighting for the d5 square. Very often, black just kicks this knight on d5 by playing knight f6, for instance, and black is just doing completely fine here. Or if you take on e6, queen g4, then black just protects this pawn also without any problems, the position. So this is a solid way. Bishop e7, black is fine. I think it was played by Maxim Vachier-Lagrave also, so no problem at all. But also bishop e6 is sharper, it's more complicated. The idea is that now it works against bishop g5, as I've already explained. I just play knight d7 and I can always play h6 after, so now bishop f6 already doesn't make sense. Knight will take on f6. So that's why bishop e6. And now again, to justify white's play, he needs to play actively, obviously. So f4. Actually, it's not so easy. The best move considered to be g6 here. Well, yeah, you better know it. I mean, it's not easy to play it over the board if you don't know, because first of all, you might be a bit afraid of this, f e, queen d8, king d8, but there is nothing to be afraid of, because again, now this h4 move is very counterproductive, because g4 square is weak and it's a very important square. The knight on f6 will probably land there sooner or later. So here black is perfectly fine in this endgame. Then usually bishop e2 is played here, so you see white is trying to go all in, g4, etc. So knight c6. h5 doesn't bring much dividends. Black can even play bishop e7 and hg, fg, no problem at all. Black has better development and, well, he's perfectly fine here. So g4, this is the principal move. And now I believe ef4 is probably the most reliable. h6 was played sometimes here also, with the idea that after g5, hg, fg, yeah, you can blockade here. Knight h5 is a very typical, complicated, unclear position, strategically very complex. But after h6, f5 is critical, and now has to be analyzed this gf, bishop b3, ab, queen b6. Of course, strategically, white is better, but his king is in the center, not easy to develop, very unclear position. But I think, yeah, so it's playable also. But ef is also fine. Now if bishop takes f4, simply d5 is fine already. So white usually goes g5. And now very important f3, very important resource, because bishop on f3, well, white's bishop will go anyway on f4. So let's say knight d7, bishop takes f4. This is probably somewhat better for white, because after f3, bishop f3, knight d7, in any case, white will play bishop f4, but then black will have actually a clear tempi after knight e5, attacking the bishop on f3. So in this position, it's very unclear. Black has quite a nice counterplay, so sharp, complicated, and with very double-edged, with winning chances for black also. So all what we want playing Najdorf. So yeah, h4, e5, knight b3, your choice. Bishop e7 is solid and safe. Bishop e6 is sharp and double-edged. But in both cases, black is fine, in my opinion. Then what else? Let's check other strange moves. a3. Well, also a strange move, but you know, the point is that it's so difficult nowadays with white to fight for advantage in Najdorf, especially in the top level. You need to memorize a lot of variations, and there is always a risk. So quite often, even very top players, they're trying to find some little idea to, well, for 1-2 games, at least to surprise the opponent. And by the way, a3 was played by Magnus Carlsen in classical chess, and I think in rapid also. So he tried this a3. To be honest, I don't quite get, first of all, what's the problem if black just plays knight c6? Because what does white want? Maybe he wants to play bishop e2, I suppose. Yeah, because bishop c4 is possible, but then e6, we are going to check this position later with a pawn on a3. I think it's just totally harmless. So maybe bishop e2 was the idea, and after e6 to try to play bishop e3, etc. But I would also consider bishop e2, maybe g6. So I mean, knight c6 is fine, but of course e5 is the most principal move here again. And now Magnus was trying to play knight f5. Again, in case of knight f3, well, queen c7, there is this type of play, or simpler is bishop e7. We are going actually to study this position with the white's pawn on a4, if white plays a4 instead of a3, and I think it's more favorable for white to have pawn on a4, because here black has this typical b5 idea, and even though I think, even with a pawn on a4, I think black is doing perfectly well, but with a pawn on a3, I don't see any problem. I think it's just fine, but I think Magnus' idea was to play knight f5. It's clear it gives completely nothing for white, but at least the game gets very strange. Yeah, and then there is, and I think Magnus managed to beat Radomir Wojtaszek once, like in this style, playing a3. But frankly, black has many ways to be fine here. So d4, bishop takes f6. First of all, queen takes f6 is okay. Knight d5, queen c6. Now c4, this is the idea, otherwise bishop takes f5 was threatening. Now black can probably develop slowly, but g6 is a very principal move. And now, of course, if white comes back to g3, he cannot be better. Black can play h5. It's a complicated position, very strange, but black with having two bishops. Of course, white has a knight on d5, very nice knight, but that's the only advantage of his positions. Otherwise, black has d4 pawn, two bishops, I believe, should be at least equal. So the idea is probably knight takes d4, e d4, queen takes d4. Now black has to play f6, and there were some games on this position. Finally, it seems like it's a draw, or at least equal, or quite often just leads to a forced draw. So it's also fine for black. But gf, I believe, yeah, I would already try to be more ambitious and take on gf, because I like black's position. I think has some chances to take the initiative also. And knight b1, a very strange play. Another move is knight a2. That's maybe why a3 was played. Well, first of all, to stop bishop b4, and also that you in this position have a chance to play knight a2. Well, white wants to establish some blockade on the white squares, even though having quite some space, black can simply develop bishop e6, knight c6. I'm not sure white has anything here. But, well, maybe most direct is to take, play queen d5. There were games like this, bishop e2 and even e4 directly. And, well, there were a few games, it was ending in equal position. Black is completely fine here. So, but also, as I mentioned, he doesn't have to take on f5. On knight b1, here again, black has a choice. Most of the time, black would take, play queen d5, and then maybe queen h5, knight d7. Very strange, complicated position, very hard to assess. Of course, there is a certain potential for white if he manages knight d2, bishop d3, knight d4. But this is more fairy tale, you know, it's not going to happen. Black will do something about it. So all in all, very unclear position. Also, I don't know if after queen b6 I like even more. Let's say queen b6, knight d2, bishop e6, bishop d3, knight d7. Again, to me, I would take black in this position, even if it's objectively unclear. I would say maybe equal, but yeah, I like two bishops. I like my center. Yes, there is a double pawn on f line, but black will probably castle on, and yeah, it shouldn't be any problem. So this is not too serious, this a3 variation, but also on top of this, yeah, knight c6 is also quite a serious move, I would say. So a3, okay. You're not going to skip playing Najdorf because of a3, that's for sure. Then what else? What are the other strange moves? Knight b3. Well, cannot be more illogical move than this, because you know already in many Sicilian black is losing tempi trying to remove this knight from d4. But yeah, it's playable again. Of course, white has no chance really to fight for advantage, but he has a chance to get a playable position, at least Sicilian, complicated and clear Sicilian. So for black, what I can offer you, yeah, g6 is possible. White wants to play bishop g5, bishop g7, queen d2. Black can now play immediately knight d7, trying to go b5, because bishop h6 usually is not so clear. You can even take and just play b5, bishop b7. I mean, you get counterplay here. Also possible to play h6, bishop e3, let's say knight c6, f3, b5. Very complicated position. For the time being, you cannot really castle with black, but you don't have to hurry. You can play next bishop d7, rook b8, develop your play there. One day, after all, you can play always h5 and castle if you want to castle. So very unclear position, playable. I think e6 is the simplest. Actually, the simplest because, well, as I understand, the only reasonable idea here is to play g4. Otherwise, okay, if you play a4, at least if b6, g4, strangely enough here, maybe it can be playable for white, but let's say if you go knight c6, now if a5, black can just go d5 and then bishop gets to b4, it's totally fine for black. And in case of bishop e2, you just play b6, then bishop e7, and well, it's just such a great Scheveningen, because very often black loses. Black has in this position already bishop on d7, because in order to force white to move back to b3, and then having spent this tempo on bishop d7, very often black plays bishop c8, bishop b7. So here it's like at least one tempo up, maybe two. No, of course black is fine here. It's just a game, but black has no problems. So I believe the only test can be g4 move here. And after g4, it just leads to a complicated position. b5, well, after g5, of course, it's always possible to play knight fd7, but on top of this, b4 actually is good, just good for black, this position after gf bc. So that's why maybe better for white is to stop b4 with a3, also very typical idea in all Sicilians. Bishop b7, let's say queen e2, bishop e7, very logical way the game can proceed. Knight d7, h4, knight c6. Well, I think black has a very good game here, because again, knight went to b3 on his own. With a knight on d4, bishop on e3, these positions are much more dangerous. Here, black, well, always has a lot of counterplay with knight e5, knight c4 if white starts to try to play long castle. If short castle, since black haven't castled yet, he can also try to get some h6, kicking the opponent's king from this from this side. Then he wants rook c8, knight e5. Well, I would take black in this position. I mean, I like more black. So knight b3, of course, is also, and it cannot be just impossible. If knight b3 move can be dangerous, yeah, then I would admit that I don't understand anything about chess at all. So then now let's come back. Let's come to already a bit more, in my opinion, serious moves, but still not too dangerous for black. Next, what I would like to show you is f4. White playing f4. I played it in my childhood actually with white, but in fact, of course, black has many ways of playing, like knight bd7 is also possible, bishop e2, g6 system is quite complicated and unclear, but after e5, I don't see a slightest problem for black, so I would recommend you with black to play e5, and also with white, if not e5, I would at least consider the system, but here, this is by far the most popular move, and white has nothing. Usually white plays knight f3. If already you decide to study f4 and to include it in your repertoire, I would maybe advise you to try knight b3 at least, which is, of course, well, it doesn't, well, as knight f3, it doesn't give any chance really objectively for opening advantage, but at least this move is very rare. Here, the idea is that in case of knight bd7, maybe g4 it's tryable now for white, because, okay, if you play in more classical fashion here, black is just very fine. I mean, in this position, you better, when we will study bishop e2 variation, we will have this type of positions. Of course, with a pawn on f3, white has the pawn on e4 is protected, and here black can have some issues in this position with a pawn on f3. Here, when f4 is played, the e4 pawn is forever weak, yeah. So black always has a lot of counterplay against the pawn on e4, and again, in this position, I would already take black. I would prefer to play black. So already, if you play knight b3, I think you should follow up with g4. And black, for instance, has this idea of playing d5. In fact, otherwise, computer thinks that white has some chances for an advantage. I'm not quite sure about it. Frankly, I don't see why, but it says that d5 is equalizing, but otherwise, it's not so easy. And after ed knight b6, fe knight takes d5, well, some variations here, quite complicated lines, and finally it's more or less equal position. But at least it's playable for white. It's quite new. I think g4 is not played too much, and d5 especially after g4. But after knight b3, I actually check this position. I think here knight is maybe simpler to put knight on c6. From the black side, I would advise to do this, not to allow those complications with g4. And after knight c6, I couldn't also really find any constructive idea for white, because if bishop e2, bishop e7, let's say castle is just totally nothing for white, because very often black is playing Scheveningen with e6 and then playing e5. So let's say white's bishop is already on e3 and it's still fine for black often. Here, black just wants b5, very typical play, absolutely no problem. So, and then in case if white is trying to play f5, here, first of all, d5 might work, very typical also idea. Might be perfectly fine for black, very complicated, unclear game, but even if you just play simple bishop e7, let's say g4, h6, typical bishop e3, b5, well, bishop b7, then e4 pawn is always quite vulnerable. It's very easy to get worse with white in such positions. Kasparov won many games like this with black, attacking this pawn on e4, so I think that knight b3, knight c6 is simpler and it's easy equality. So then, but the main move by far is knight f3. Now knight b7, now already knight d7 is simpler because there is no g4. And here, well, a4 is usually played, because if white plays bishop c4, then first of all bishop e7 is also fine, but b5 is quite unpleasant. After b5, well, it seems that already black is slightly better actually here, because again, here in those lines after f4, e4 pawn becomes really an issue for white. Yeah, it's hanging in many lines. So let's say bishop d5, rook b8, and black just wants to develop bishop e7 castles. Then b4 is coming also, and knight g5, at least an attempt to play active. Knight takes d5, queen. If knight d5, well, black just develops bishop e7 with at least equal position, and queen takes d5, queen e7. Then black will, just play h6, knight f6, or bishop b7, just kick all the pieces back, and having this also b4 maybe. So having the two bishops, at least according to engine, black is already better here. So bishop c4 is, because of b5, nobody plays. So a4 normally, trying to stop b5. And here, well, both bishop e7 and queen c7 is fine. By far, the main move is bishop e7, and it's completely fine. But if you want just to get a complicated playable position, I think queen c7 is completely all right also. I quite like this move. Just not to give white the option to put the bishop on c4. And, well, white usually then already places his bishop on d3, bishop e7. Well, you can start with a5 or start with a castle. It leads to the same position. So then black just goes knight c5, rook e8, bishop d7. It's not the most popular way of playing with black in against the system, but I don't see absolutely any advantage for white here. So let's say a5, you just play knight c5, or king h1, for instance, knight c5, queen e1. Now maybe rook e8 is a nice move, because black is also preparing maybe even d5 at some point. And also after FEDE, that, or just in case queen g3, that, you know, this pawn is somehow protected with a rook on e8. So engine is just saying that it's completely equal with any move of black and white. It's just complicated equal position. Let's say bishop e3. Now you can take bishop d7, and it's a game. I don't see why white should be any better. Yeah, because white has potential initiative on the king side, even though it's very, very potential, but black has a lot of pressure on the e4 pawn, and everything is developed well. King is safe. Why should it be better for white? I don't know. I think it's very simple and reliable option, but bishop e7 is also okay. For example, now if bishop d3, castles, you can play knight c5. I mean, you can even play more directly now with black, so white has to work hard to get this position which we just looked at. Because, for instance, if queen e1, rook e8, already not so easy for white. After king h1, black has, of course, he can transpose to this, but also already d5 seems to be doing well. I mean, it's very good play for black. So king h1 usually is played, and again here black has a wide choice of options. Even d5 is completely okay for black. Takes, if fe knight e4, if knight e5, knight c4, bishop e3. It's playable for white, but no more than that, just complicated position. Then, of course, you can still play queen c7 and transpose to this line, which I just showing to you, and I think it's very simple and good also for black. There are many other ways of playing, for example, like this. Also, some people are playing like this, queen e1, rook c8, and then the idea is, in case of h3, bishop h5, knight h4 to bishop g6, something like that. That's a little bit strange to play like this, but also completely fine for black. Very equal, complicated, playable position. So it's really harmless. Black can equalize in any way he wants to equalize. I also have to mention that there is ef4, there is some variation in case of bishop takes f4, queen b6 check, and then queen takes b2. It's also not refuted, by the way. So it's not clear why to play with white this position, because whatever black is doing is fine. So in my opinion, at least bishop c4 maybe is more interesting. At least bishop is more active. Castles, and the simplest, of course, black again has various interesting ideas, but I found for you, because again with white I don't recommend you to play this. I don't see any real prospects. But for black, I found a very, very clear-cut equality here, which is ef, bishop f4, knight c5. It's not played very often, but I think it's a very simple and clear. So queen e2, what else? The pawn is hanging, and bishop e6. I mean, as simple as it is. And the most important, of course, if bishop e6, it's just completely nothing. Take f e6, probably knight e6 is also okay. It's just equal position, but the most important that knight d4 could have be, well, at least interesting. If not, black just has tactics with a forced draw, basically. Knight takes e4, and after knight takes e4, d5. And in all lines, black just takes back the piece, and it ends in a draw. So if you want to equalize, this is very clear equalizer. If you want to play complicated position for a win, you can always do queen c7. So all in all, f4, e5 is really, really good for black. I think no need to study knight d7 or other moves. So then a4. This move is already, this move is quite interesting. It was played on the top level. I myself played it in Blitz a couple of times, and okay, it's just Blitz. But there was even classical chess game, Firuza, I think in Riga 2021, Firuza Vashila Graf, and actually Firuza got some plus out of the opening. Of course, it doesn't represent any serious danger, but it can be part of your repertoire with white. It's a solid move. White is in full control in every line, and black still has to show some knowledge and a few accurate moves to equalize. I mean, so a4, I would like to attract your attention on this move. So what is the idea? Well, if black plays e6, white has nothing better than to transpose to the main Scheveningen system, classical one, because with a4 you will not castle long anymore. Obviously you will castle short, but at least it's a serious system. It's not so trivial for black to equalize, and not at all everyone who plays Najdorf, he's playing it with e6, so he knows all the theory. So that is fine. I mean, that is playable for white. In any case, a4 you don't really play for a serious opening advantage. So with this system, what you want with white is to get a playable position which is solid, and maybe a certain small positional pressure, tiny better. That is what you want. So after e6, well, this is fine. You have good chances for this outcome of the opening. Knight c6 is logical, but here there are two ways of playing. First of all, you can take an a5 and again, if in this position, if not a5, black would of course put pawn on a5 and then it would be fine. But here there is a certain problem with the b6 square. There is some potential. White will play bishop d3, at some point maybe bishop d2, knight a4, knight b6. This square is weak, and also a6 pawn is vulnerable. So here white can try. I mean, probably black is equalizing with a very precise moves, but it's not so trivial. And also I saw that white was also playing a5. Quite a strange but interesting pawn sacrifice. In case of knight takes a5, knight d5. And let's say if knight c6, bishop e3, there was a game, I think, Kamsky-Topalov, Kazan 2011. So maybe also interesting. A computer quite like a5, even though I'm not sure. I would rather probably just play like this, more positional. Then what else? Black can do g6, bishop e2, bishop g7, but here there is a minor difference, but quite important, because for some reason with a4, a6 included, after knight c6, already queen d2 is more dangerous than, because without a4, a6, you can check my lesson on Dragon, then I think d5 was just a very simple equalizer. Here, for some reason, d5 already, rook fd1. I don't know why a4, a6 is so important. I think, if I remember well, because this e6 move, which was kind of okay in that line, now computer shows in this particular position that a5 is important, than some b6 square. I don't know. I mean, it's all a bit too delicate and complicated for me to understand. But what is clear that with a4, a6 included, queen d2, okay, it's playable for white. That's why d5 is considered to be already here not so promising. So black usually plays bishop d7, rook fd1, and there is still a lot of theory, of course, perfectly playable for black, but also playable for white. I mean, black still has to, to be accurate, is still fighting for equality. Haven't achieved it completely yet. So then, but probably I would advise you to play e5 after e4. I think this is a very reliable and equalizing system. Not too many winning chances for black, but at least you can make sure that you equalize. If you want to play for a win with black after a4, maybe then try to go g6 and play this dragon type of position. Here after e5, knight f3, bishop e7. Now bishop c4 is quite harmless. a4 is not really a good move, because the b4 square very often for the knight is important. Let's say queen e2, queen c7, bishop a2 or bishop b3, it leads to the same position. h6, very simple, castles, knight c6, and now the knight gets to b4, and this is if the pawn wouldn't be on a4, usually these positions, let's say with bishop on b3, pawn on a2, they're not so simple. Here black is just fine. Rook d1, you can play rook c8, you can also play knight b4. A very typical position, and I would say very equal. But the idea is bishop g5. This is what Alireza Firouzja played. Bishop g5. Now, if knight bd7 is not recommended, bishop c4. White should be should have some plus in this position. So bishop e6, very, very important. You already know the white's move now. Black wants to play knight bd7, so bishop takes f6, of course. Bishop f6, knight d5, knight d7. Black just needs to get rook c8 and he will be fine, but bishop c4, very important that bishop gets to this diagonal, rook c8. And here there is a theory. Actually, if white just manages to stabilize castles b3, it can be some plus, because the d5 square now is protected. Bishop on this diagonal c4 on a2 g8 diagonal, white's bishop is defending this knight on d5. But it's very direct after rook c8. Actually, it's very difficult for white to manage how to not to allow some simplifications. For instance, if queen e2, I think that Firouzja played b3 in this position. But if queen e2, then knight b6, very important move. And in case if you take bishop e6, queen e6, this position is just equal. Actually, white has to play b3, and he is clearly tempted down compared to Firouzja game against Vashila Graf, and even there it was actually not very much for white. So usually black castles, c4, and then knight d7. Well, it's an equal position. And so white is usually trying sometimes to take on b6, take on e6, and to pretend that in this structure maybe knight can be a little bit more little better than the bishop and this double e pawns. Actually, it's true. White is very, very little bit better, but of course, very little. But the thing is that here after bishop e6, actually queen takes b2 is very good. It's just tactics work. So now very forced line, bishop c8, queen a1, queen d1, queen c3 check, king e2, queen takes c8, white takes on d6. Some strange play, if queen c2, knight d2, but finally it's just equal. It's simply equal. So queen e2, knight b6 to me is like a forced equality. That's maybe the reason why b3 was played in this game. And I think Vachier played knight b6, which leads to this position that was played in the game, c4, castle first and then c4. And of course you don't need queen on e2. And here white is very, very little bit better. Of course, black still is extremely solid. Let's say castle, knight d7. Then knight wants to get to c5, maybe f5 one day. But rook e1, I think knight d2 at some point was played by Alireza, and I think knight is doing nothing on d2. It's better to keep it on f3. So rook e1, well, okay. Not much, but playable at least for white. I mean, again, I wouldn't say that black fully equalized, but of course it shouldn't be enough for anything substantial. Yeah, but after b3, I believe the best way for black is to castle and rook c5 to play in this fashion. It's actually very direct. Yeah, black wants to go b5 to fight for the center. Queen d3 seems to be the best move against b5, and now I think queen c8. This is a K move, a very important move to equalize in this position. Not an easy move to make, better to know this move. Because, well, black actually still insists on playing b5 at some point because the c2 pawn is hanging. Also wants to take on d5, and then again there is an issue with the pawn on c2. And on top of this, preparing sometimes bishop d8, this maneuver, and then black bishop can, for example, black can take on d5, play knight f6, bishop b6, bishop can get into this diagonal. So after queen c8, I think black solves all his problems. Knight d2 maybe is the most interesting try for white. And here even bishop takes d5, bishop d5, knight b6 is completely okay for black. It's just an equal position. So, in my opinion, after a4, e5 is very, very clear, pretty forcing move, which is giving black, equality. And again, if you want something sharper, probably then g6, I would recommend you, which is also playable. So a4, but white is safe, I mean, solid and safe in every line. And if you prefer more positional game. If you don't like all those sharp variations in Najdorf, then this is a definitely possible system to include into your repertoire with white. And last for today, Queen d3. A very strange move. Also, why it is a bit, clearly superior to Queen f3 or Queen e2, I don't know, but it becomes rather popular, Queen d3, lately. Van Forest plays it, even Magnus Carlsen played it, I think more in rapid chess, but still. So again, I don't believe a second it can really fight for any considerable plus, but it's playable. It's playable. I want to show you. Black has a wide choice of options here. I don't know, e5 maybe already is not so great. I suppose can be knight f5, can be an issue, because usually you go d5 here, probably e d5, knight takes d5, yeah, and takes, the knight on f5 is protected, yeah, so this doesn't work already. But you can do almost any move here. Everywhere the position is just playable and complicated. g6 is one setup. Bishop g5, bishop g7. There are quite many games on this. Long castle, let's say knight d7, f4, castles, bishop e2. So little bit unusual setup for from white to play against against dragon. But it's playable. h6, bishop h4, and very complicated game where, well, white has his chances, black has his counter chances. But it's not bulletproof. Yeah, g6, white definitely can try, at least. I like both e6 or knight d7. I don't even know what more. Actually, maybe more e6 than knight d7. But knight d7 is also fine. Knight d7, now there is nothing really better than bishop e2, probably. e6. Okay, it's very logical, yeah, to play e6 with this strange queen on d3. And here at least white has a chance to play. First of all, he can try to play positionally, and I think this is how Magnus played once in rapid. He just was going a4 at some point, and then queen to g3, bishop b7, castles. For some reason, engine says that pawn on e4 is not really hanging. It's too dangerous to take it. So, like queen c7, rook e1. Engines like playing h5 here also. Kind of equal, typical Sicilian, just a game, yeah. But quite sharp and interesting is g4, although this is very double-edged. h6, queen h3, well, just trying to push g5. Let's say knight c5, f3. Well, it's obvious that this is a good Najdorf for black if you compare it with main lines, with f3, bishop e3, that's for sure, but still it's playable for both, yeah, for white as well. Here, engine actually pretends that e5, knight b3, d5 is enough to equalize, even though the lines are quite complicated. And you can also play b5, for instance, g5, knight h7. Also very strange, complicated, a typical Najdorf. A lot of resources for both sides, very unclear position. The one who plays better will prevail. So knight bd7 is okay, but maybe even simpler is e6 in my opinion. Because now with bishop e2, already b5 actually is good. So now white is almost forced to play a4. And then the white's idea actually is after knight c6 that he wants to take and play queen g3. Again, you see this plan with queen on g3. Of course, white have played a4 already. Well, not a great move, so I don't think white can realistically really be better. But at least I think Magnus Carlsen won in Vaikanze a game like this. Well, quite recently. So it's playable. At least it's playable. Therefore, even though I still believe you can perfectly play this position with black, but I quite like bishop d7 as well. And now probably a5, this or that way. White, of course, after he played a4, he cannot castle long, it's just too dangerous, so he has to go for short castle, or a5 first, bishop e7, let's say bishop e2, knight c6, knight takes e6, so this position will appear this or that way. Nothing better white has than this plan, castles, bishop e3, let's say knight d7. Again, a typical position. While so it seems that after queen d3, black can get it actually, where white has nothing better than this, than playing like this. But it's normally it's pretty equal. I don't see. I mean, normally there is no problem at all for black. So that's why, of course, it's not a forced draw. But queen c7, rook c8. Black has a very good Scheveningen, very solid and full of. Also has some counter chances. So in my opinion, I would recommend you with black just to play e6 because you want now b5 and after a4 bishop d7 even to avoid knight takes e6 queen g3 and just to get to this totally normal playable position. So I think we went through all those small sidelines. I think everywhere I gave you at least one, I think more than one actually in every line, more than one way to get a very decent position with black. Sometimes completely equal, sometimes even slightly better if white is going too far. So I don't see any problem in any of those lines. And now let's move to more serious stuff against Najdorf.